Hey everybody, it's Razib with the podcast with Josiah Neely, the conversation. I think we're at are we at 46?
That's what's on the label.
Okay, we're at 46. We're at 46. Let's go live. Let's go live now. Yeah. The Gen X uh, uh things, like the Bill O'Reilly thing that I'm alluding to there for those of you who
Yeah.
don't know. It's like we're starting to get so old that like I'm starting to worry that nobody knows
People
what I'm
won't know what it
talking about.
is.
And I'm like,
Um,
oh wait, this is what like
well,
being old
and what
feels like.
yeah, and what listeners don't understand is I think we one or both of us have done a version of that joke at least half a dozen times, but I it's always been before we hit record. So I think this may be the first time that it's actually happening
Yeah, and I didn't wanna, like I'm in the office,
on
I didn't wanna,
the
like, yell
yeah,
super loud, like, it's like,
yeah.
"Let's fucking go live," And,
I
like, I was gonna
always
throw my
I was
pencil.
yeah, I've always had a lot of sympathy for Bill O'Reilly in that particular situation because it's like you just want to get something over with, and people are kind of messing up, like they're doing something that doesn't matter. And so you're just like, all right, come on, let's just do it. And he did a good job. Like when the camera rolled, he held it together and did a good take. And sometimes that's what you need.
I
You
mean,
need
life
to
is
let
stressful. Life
yeah
is stressful. When you're grown up, you realize that it's not all, so as we're recording, I guess we should talk really quickly. I mean, we're just 2 guys, like, offering our opinions and, I mean, sometimes people are like, "You don't really know anything about that." I'm like, "Yeah, that's the whole point. This is
yeah
content 2025." I mean, there are,
right
I mean, if you wanna hear Josiah talk about energy, we can talk about energy or some legal stuff that no, again, he doesn't look at his face. He doesn't wanna talk about that. But, the big beautiful bill passed. I haven't really kept track of it. I know people are gonna get off, the healthcare rolls, and then, like, on my Twitter feed, I think the conservatives are saying, "Oh," or some I'll say MAGA people because, like, I think there's been some, like, fracture in that, are saying, "Oh, well, those are just illegals," all this stuff. Our deficit's growing bigger. I guess the question, y look, there's a lot of stuff in the bill. I don't know all the details. Like, some of it sounds pretty bad, to be honest, but it's like, what, like, some thousand page bill? Of course, it's gonna be bad stuff in there. But, and it, like, barely passed, as per usual, which, okay, like, I don't know. I always
yeah
think, like, 50-50 is suspicious. It's like, what I'm trying to say? It's like they, like, kind of were like, "Okay, like, we're gonna, like, draw some straws, and you guys have to, like, vote
yeah.
for it. We can vote against
You
it,"
you always have to figure, yeah, with 50-50, if one of the 50 had said, "You know what? I changed my mind. I'm voting no,"
That's
uh,
maximum leverage.
another yes vote would have materialized out of somewhere
Yeah.
most.
Yeah, so it's not really 50-50, but, it was close. So I think, like, I mean, we've talked about this. I think everyone, well, not everyone, but, people in our circles, liberals have traditionally not talked about it as much, but I think they are also starting to talk about it because it's Republicans that are doing it. Uh, the budget deficit, you know, and the potential debt crisis and national bankruptcy. And I think that that is really the shadow of, like, you have Thomas Massey and Elon making noises on from the quote right, traditional fiscal hawks. Uh, so Donald Trump, one of the things is about him is he's kind of like a hodgepodge of policy views. So it's hard to say that he is, he's not like what is it, severely conservative like Mitt Romney. You know,
Right,
like
right.
he moderated on the abortion plan, for example, even though he was responsible by his appointments for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But the reality is, I mean, the Republicans don't have a real strong position, a federal position on abortion right now. Even though the party overall is pro-life, Trump is basically like put the brakes on that. So that's moderate. And then like on the fiscal stuff, he's always been a dove in terms of deficit spending. He hasn't liked to cut things. Um, and so we have a big deficit, although this is like driving tax cuts or maintaining tax cuts. Um, and but, on stuff like immigration, he's a hawk, like, and so it's kind of this hodgepodge. It's hard to like generalize. It's like Donald Trump is, in some ways, he's like moderate and radical at the same time, but in very different ways. And like what you want to highlight. So I mean, so for example, for like the war stuff, he is not a neocon, but he's not necessarily a dove either. It just depends. you know? And so I think with this bill, a lot of subsidies for solar. Actually, there's an energy angle because I don't know what to think about this because I don't know anything about this. What's up with the subsidies disappearing for solar and wind and like subsidies for coal? This is what I've heard about, but I haven't dug deep in it. Have you like looked into it? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that goes back and forth, and it's actually been a long standing issue with some of the subsidies for wind and solar energy, like called the production tax credit, the PTC, the investment tax credit, ITC, which give either money for construction or for generation, right? It's like about 2 cents a kilowatt hour potentially for generation of renewable energy. And, it's been around for, so that's been around for a long time. It's kind of almost gone away at various points, and then they kind of bring it back. And there are also there's a lot of supercharged subsidies for various clean energy sources in the IRA that Biden passed a couple years back. So, and I haven't actually, as we're recording this, I haven't looked what's in the final in terms of phase out dates and other things like that. There's a lot of um, talk I see online about how this is going to be disastrous for take your pick, clean energy, energy in general, the economy in general, AI, other stuff. I mean, I'm kind of skeptical. I don't think that these subsidies really are optimal policy in general. And I think specifically with regard to renewable energy, there was a time where if you cut subsidies for renewable energy, that would have killed new investment in renewable energy. But that time has passed. Like wind and solar, increasingly, these are mature technologies. They're very cheap, even without the subsidies. Um, they are cheaper than most other forms of electricity, right? Especially if you're looking at like what is their marginal, what are they going to compete against, right? They're not probably not going to compete against a uh, combined cycle gas plant or whatever. They're going to compete against a peaker plant, right? A peaker gas plant, which is pretty expensive. So, you know, probably it will have some effects on the margin, and do this or that, but just removing the subsidies at this point, I don't think it's going to stop renewable energy. I think it's probably good policy. So we'll see how it goes. A lot of this stuff, the budget, these budget bills or spending bills, I guess you should call them. This is, I think, an area where Congress really does matter, as much as the president. I mean, there's other areas of policy, whether it's like border enforcement or foreign policy, especially, where really who the president is kind of determines how things go. But with spending bills, even though the president may have like a proposal, which is gets the ball rolling, and he obviously has a lot of influence, the members, they all want their pound of flesh, and they all take their thing. So what you end up with typically in order to get something passed are these giant hodgepodge of a 500 different people's priorities, and there's going to be some good stuff in there, there's going to be some bad stuff in there. I think historically, I mean, the deficit, I think, is a real problem. uh Certainly the levels of deficits that we have been running for the past 5-6 years are almost comical in historical terms. I can remember during the George W. Bush administration, there was a big deal because the deficit at one point hit $400 billion, right? So, like a $2 trillion a year deficit, that just sounds like that would have sounded like just a made up number or whatever. But that's not sustainable in a sense. You got to reorder things. Um, Historically, the way that you get some sort of budget discipline to the extent that you get it out of Congress is you need a, a Republican Congress and a Democrat president, right? Because if you have a Democrat Congress and a Democrat president, okay, they're going to spin, spin, spin. If you have a Republican president and a Democrat Congress, I mean, they want to oppose the Republican president in all sorts of ways, but generally it's not by cutting spending. And if you have a Republican president and a Republican Congress, even though they're both nominally uh, committed to limited government cutting spending or whatever, it's just very hard to maintain discipline. So you know, Trump is a fiscal dove, but George W. Bush, I mean, he ran for the time really big deficits because of the Iraq War and other stuff like that. And then even Reagan, who was known as like a government spending hawk, and he was for domestic spending, but because of the military buildup and all that sort of stuff, you ended up with huge deficits there as well. So at some point, you kind of figure there will be some sort of. I mean, I guess the other feature about this is the reason why this keeps happening and we have these big deficits is because ultimately there really have not been any consequences for it, right? In the sense of, our ability to borrow remains mostly fine. It's not having a drag on the economy yet. At some point, you figure it will. Just the amount that we have to pay on the interest, and if interest rates go up more, that might provide some level of discipline. But to, it, until there's real consequences, it's a very hard thing to just say as a matter of principle. Hey, we shouldn't hand out all this free money, right? That's democracies are not good at that.
Well, let's give just some perspective. I mean, I think people should know this, but like I'm just going to review because like sometimes you don't. So like as a percentage, and so obviously, there's issues with nominal numbers. So as a percentage of our GDP after World War II, when we were obviously doing deficit spending, it was 120% of our economy, of our GDP. Okay. It dropped as a percentage, kind of bottomed out the first Reagan term as 25% or 30% of our GDP. And then it jumped up. Uh, obviously during the late 80s, there was kind of like early 90s. You remember, we both remember like 1992, Ross Perot, they're talking about the deficits. It peaked at about like 60 some percent, low 60s. And then it dropped, during the Clinton era obviously, and then we actually had year-on-year surpluses. I mean, not the
Right.
whole, but like we had yearly
Yeah.
budgets. It dropped again back down to like about a little above 50, and then it kind of like inched up during George W. Bush. Then the financial crisis hits, and it jumps up to about 100%. So it went from like about 60%, I think, during the end of the Bush term to about like 100%. And then during the pandemic, there's another jump uh, up to 120%. And that's where we're at now. So we've gone in our, like, I would say, like, we were like politically conscious creatures at a time when the budget deficit peaked uh, around half of where it is as a proportion of our GDP. And then it dropped, and we didn't really have to, quote, worry about it until the financial crisis, where we did, deficits. We did a lot of we boosted the economy, stabilizers, the Great Recession, blah blah blah, but we never ended up drawing it down. So that's where we are, and that's kind of scary if you think about it. Like with a family, like I say, a middle to upper middle class family, you know, it's not optimal to have like like that much debt. Like if it's like 20 or 30%. I mean, obviously, like everyone would want zero debt, but a lot of people have debt, various types of debt, like mortgage debt or whatever. Um, but it's a big difference from going from like 30, 40, even 50% to more than your income. Which okay, like if you start out with like an expensive mortgage, that's not a big deal. But
Right.
um, this is not a mortgage, and we're not. I mean, you know, it's not like we have an asset that's appreciating. The
Yes.
U.S. government, right? And so the big issue is the bonds, the bond markets.
Hmm.
Our bonds will get more. We have to pay out more in interest, and that's going to be bad, and that can lead to kind of like a cycle,
Yeah.
right? Where we have to pay out more in interest, and we have to like cut spending, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems. We have to reallocate, probably hit the economy. Okay, if the economy is not doing well, then we have fewer taxes, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And some people are saying, as they say that basically in terms of like the big beautiful bill and like our governance, to some extent, both parties have just kind of priced in that there's going to be a debt crisis in the next generation, and we're going to have do a de facto jubilee and just kind of like go back from ground zero. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Uh, yeah, I think that's. I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll get there, but um, we do have a couple of things I would say that are going for us. One is that you know I like low taxes. I think those are good, but it is the case that if you look at the U.S. versus other developed nations, our spending, uh, like I guess I would say like our tax base or our tax rates are a lot lower than other peer nations. We don't have like most other countries have a VAT, for example. We don't have a VAT, you know, um, and there are other sources of revenue that we haven't tapped to the extent that other countries do. Now, I'm not saying that we should do that ideally, but I am saying that if we get to a point where uh, the current levels of spending and taxation are not sustainable, we do have a lot of we have a lot of headroom, on the tax side and also on the spending side. Frankly, I mean, some of it would involve perhaps, um, you know, hard choices, things that we don't want to don't want to do, but they're doable, right? They're doable. It would not.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that it's a taboo in the U.S., but it's actually relatively common in Europe, is to increase the retirement age. Uh,
Right. So yes.
and but I feel like our generation has even from when we were little, kind of priced in that would have to happen because there's just
Yeah.
too many baby boomers. So
Yeah.
at some point, the conversation is going to be had, and 70 or 69 is going to be the new 65. People actually do retire at different ages, and if you retire later, you can get Social Security. That's already a thing. But my point is that I think that we will probably have to change that. The baby boomers, the youngest ones are now 61. If I had to bet, they are not going to be affected by this because they are never affected by history. Uh, you know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just suspect that the retirement age will increase suspiciously coincidentally after the last of the baby boomers retire. If
Right.
you had to bet, it'll be our generation, Gen X, that'll be hit. And also, life expectancy is longer. People are healthier with GLPs. The productivity could increase if AI increases productivity a lot and the economy gets way bigger. We'll just grow our way out of the deficit. So there's possibilities. I guess so. Tom Tillis is not running for reelection now in North Carolina, and Thomas Massey has become like a focal point of anti-Trump republicanism. I mean, I know that you think. I mean, because we've talked about this before, like offline and online. These people who are kind of like resisting the MAGA movement. Kind of you said like kind of like they're kind of like the past, and they'll disappear. I do wonder though about so for example, let's assume JD Vance is nominated in 2028. I, I do wonder about the ideological coherency without Trump, and I think that if people could just last it out, I think we might have a much more diverse coalition. I mean, I don't diverse is like a weird freighted word, but I mean, right now, basically what Trump says goes. Like you have a decider.
Right.
Once he leaves the scene, and like knock on wood, he's you know seemingly healthy right now, but also like he might not be like Bill Clinton, you know?
Right.
Like Bill
Yes.
Clinton's been around forever. Like his influence disappeared with really declined after Obama, but Obama's going to be around forever. Um, Biden's not going to be around that much longer.
Right.
Honestly, I think we know that. Frankly, Trump, I mean, at his age, so I think that there's going to have to be new voices, and I don't see like big figures in the Republican Party. I mean, JD's we both love him, but he's not the same type of person. I think the same with the Democratic Party. Actually, I think both parties are going to have an issue where they don't have a big decider that can kind of bring all the different factions to heel really quickly.
Yeah. I I think at this point, obviously, it's there's a lot of time, so there's a lot of things that can happen. Right now, uh, JD seems to have a fairly dominant. He's building his own reputation in the party. He's got a dominant pole position, I would say, for the nomination. If God forbid something were to happen to Trump, uh, I think he could take over and be a leader of the MAGA movement. It's not, and again, I'm just talking about political realities here, not necessarily my own policy preferences, because I tend to be, a, fairly laissez-faire. But um, the Republican Party, if you look at right of center parties in other developed countries, the Republican Party is further out on the like free market, limited government,
Liberal economics,
liberal
neoliberal economics.
economics than a lot of them. So it's certainly, I don't think that there's anything untenable or uh, you know contradictory about having a successful, right populist party that's still going to be fairly pro market, pro business, limited government or whatever, but is not going to be as certainly rhetorically committed to to pushing those things as the Paul Ryan era people were. To some extent, that was more a matter of rhetoric than reality anyway. But yeah, I mean, especially to some extent, I think it might even help them electorally. I mean, I think it helped Trump electorally that he was able to neutralize the attack that always comes
Yeah,
from the
Social
Democrats to
security
say they want
privatization.
to cut your Social Security and your uh, Medicare.
All right. I think I mentioned this before. I think it was like Funny or Die did this thing during 2012 where it was like Romney and Ryan, and it was pretty funny. Like a lot of it was about like Romney being like super rich, and he didn't care. But the Paul Ryan thing that I always found funny, and I like Paul Ryan, but is that he got in some old woman's face and like knocked her over, and I think like the whole shtick about that is that he's going to take away her social security, and she better like trust in the free market. And I was just like, it's like pretty easy to caricature. Like again, like I probably lean towards that in some ways position, but I remember like laughing because I was like, okay, that's just like so on. Because like also Paul Ryan's like very young and youthful looking, and he's like exercises a lot. He's just like, you're old and like you're sick, and like we're gonna put you on the street.
Right, right.
and, like, and like obviously Trump. I mean, most of the conservative parties in Europe are like they're what you would call kind of Christian Democrats. Sometimes they're not labeled that, but
Mhm.
they're pretty
Yes.
much Christian Democrats. So it's kind of, they're not as socialist as the socialist parties, obviously, but they have a lot more a welfarist
Yeah.
sentiment in the United States, where we have traditionally we have had kind of two liberal parties actually. Like we have a right liberal party and a left liberal party.
Mhm. To I mean, compared to other countries,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In terms of like even in terms of individual rights as well, I think. But it's probably just because of our constitution. We're a little bit
Right.
dinosaurs because of the Bill of Rights and stuff like that. Kind of has locked certain things in. But now, I mean, both parties seem to be shifting, and I guess like that's the second topic we want to talk about the Zorhan. I mean,
Zohran, yeah.
am I the only one that like thinks of the movie The Zohan? Am I?
Was that the Adam Sandler movie
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Zohan,
It,
it kinda
you
sounds
don't
like
mess with the Zohan. You don't mess with the
don't
Zohan.
mess with
Yes.
the Zohan. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I probably should stay away with, making funny comments about his name. But, uh, yeah, you know,
Yeah, I mean, Zorhan Mamdani looks like to be the favorite to be mayor right now because he won the Democratic primary
right.
in an upset against Andrew. I mean, everyone knows about this. He has Andrew Cuomo. Um, I will. So I was talking to a mutual friend of ours. I'm not gonna say who it is, but it's somebody that people would recognize. But and he said yesterday that the people that went to kind of like grew up with him or went to Bowdoin with Zorhan said that he did seem like kind of like an angry guy about Western colonialism and stuff like that. So he's a little bit of a hater. I know he's got like a nice smile and he's got like a sunny, polished image that he's presenting. But there's a lot of things about him that are a little bit caricatured, and I think he's a little confusing for people to understand. Um, I mean, like the online influencers get a little out of control. So he's they're depicting him as a jihadi communist, which that's kind of a joke. I do think the best way to understand him is he is a very left wing person, and he has like some of the accoutrements of identitarianism to kind of make himself cooler in the 2020s. He's a younger millennial, not quite a Zoomer. He's 33, but he is a younger millennial, and so he kind of came up during the Great Awakening. Kind of matured into manhood during the Great Awakening, during like the biggest, cultural liberal peak I think that we had in this country, in the last century, arguably. And so that is who he is. Just for his background, some people might not know. Uh, I have an acquaintance, not someone I know well, but one of my group chats, who has business interests in Uganda. His paternal family, which is his dad was born in Uganda, is Ugandan Indian.
Well, he was born in New
They Yeah, yeah, and he was born in Uganda. His mother is Indian from India, but
right, yes, yes.
The director Marinara, and I'll talk about her a little bit. But his dad is from like the Gujarati. I'm assuming the Shia Ismaili community. Anyway, so they're Muslims, but like his paternal cousins are prominent, industrialists basically. So he comes from a very well off family. His dad's cast are they're Kojas. They tend to be merchants. So capitalism is their thing. His dad has obviously gone a different path. He's an academic, post-colonial professor, kind of like a junior Edward Said, who was a friend of the family.
Right.
Author of Orientalism. His mother is a well-known director, Marinaire, who's done Mississippi Masala and She's in the Kama Sutra and uh,
So, I'm sorry, what?
The Namesake. So it's just a bunch of brown stuff, but kind of like in English, I guess.
Alright.
Um,
Never heard of the Kama Sutra, but I thought it was a little bit older than, you know
well, there's a movie called The Kama Sutra in the 1990s. That was
Okay,
like I don't know if it had a connection I didn't watch it. I don't know if it had but I'm assuming it had like it was like Indian. It was like historical.
I'm sure,
But so
yes.
she's a pretty prominent director. She was offered to direct some of the Harry Potter movies, and turned it down to do The Namesake. So, they're not like uber rich, but they're definitely upper class. I would say. He went to elementary school that's like $15,000 or something ridiculous a year. For an elementary, I think it was more than 50. Anyway, he went to Bowdoin, which is like 60, 70,000 a year tuition. He's definitely like from a well-off family. His dad's a professor at Columbia, which okay, probably has a salary of 300, 400K. That's not bad. That's upper middle class. But I think his mom is a pretty successful director. Is one of the reasons that they're well off. Um, so he's fits a particular profile of kind of like a Brooklyn trustafarian. He never really had a serious job until he was an assemblyman. He kind of bounced around, which you know what, like I know a lot of people from that background that are like that. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
you know, in terms of like they never like kind of like figured out a career until relatively late. So I don't really hold that against him. It's just type of person that lives in New York, and that's a whole thing. It's a whole scene. But you know, he does a lot of things that are annoying to people. Like recently, he was eating with his hands in a really like sloppy, bad way,
Right.
which was like triggering a lot of people on the
Well,
internet.
yeah. I just want to pause and say this is maybe a pet peeve of mine because everyone's like they talk about him eating with his hands, and I guess what it means is he like had it was like a bowl of rice or something, or some sort of food in like a bowl, and he was scooping it out with his hands. And I just mentioned that because it's like, well, I eat with my hands all the time. Like if you have a burger, you eat it with your hands, right? You have French fries, you eat it with your hands, and this is not important at all. But
Yeah,
the issue is, you know, Americans have, uh, as do all societies, cultural practices, and some foods you're supposed to eat with your hands, some foods you're not supposed to eat with your hands. Like there are some foods where if you were to take a burger and eat it with a knife and fork, people would also
it'd be
think,
weird. It'd
yeah,
be weird. It'd
yeah.
be weird.
So I'm sorry. Anyway, I mean, yeah,
I don't, you know, I don't like honestly. I don't like. I like shellfish. But I don't like to eat, like, you know, crawfish, like crayfish,
right,
whatever, you know,
yeah,
like they do in Louisiana where you, like, boil them and then you have to, like, crack them open. I don't like to do that 'cause it's just too messy. Like,
yeah,
basically, like, hot chicken wings are, like, the furthest I will go, and even there, it's kinda like, "Eh." Um, but, you know, he's very being very performative. He's a very performative guy.
yes,
He didn't
right.
become a citizen until relatively late. He's a citizen of the world. He's a globalist and all that stuff.
You know
Um
what he reminds me of? He sort of reminds me of Obama, but in particular, like Obama, as self-conceived by like conservative anti-Obama people, right? So he's actually, he's this young, he's a community organizer, this young left-wing anti-colonial guy. He actually was born in Africa. He actually is a Muslim. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, well, there's a lot of things where it's like Obama and him do have a lot in common, and at the age of, say, 22 or 23, there was like a divergence. I think part of it is, frankly, he's from like a lower upper class family, and Obama was from a very solidly middle class family.
yeah,
I don't think you can say that they were necessarily upper middle class. I think they varied a little bit, you know, but I think middle class is correct. Yeah, to say about him, you know,
yes,
I mean, like,
and they were more heartland people,
yeah, yeah.
even though they were in
And so
Hawaii.
he didn't have, like Obama didn't have, like, the options, frankly, that Zoran had, but, you know, I think he did have, like, a phase after Columbia where he kinda, like, didn't do I mean, he worked, like, at some like, low-level position at some financial company. He wasn't doing much. He kinda
Right,
figured out, "Oh, I need to go to law school," and, like, kinda turn around, and then he married a black woman and became a black American.
right,
That's just a radically different term. Zohan did not do that. Zorhan. I keep saying Zohan. Like, you know, he married like a Syrian American Brooklyn hipster girl who seems to come from a wealthy Syrian family, and she likes to say she's from Damascus, but she was born in Texas. You know, the whole thing is like pretty affected. You know,
right,
and so I mean, yeah, you're right. He is what Obama could have been if Obama had stayed in New York and maybe like married his Eurasian girlfriend,
right,
you know? But which like would have been much harder for Barack Hussein Obama to become elected president, you know? And so Obama made a conscious political choice. Zorhan is younger, you know, obviously like a
right,
generation younger, and like a literal I think more than a generation actually. But in any case, more than 30 years. But uh, he's younger, and he didn't need to make those compromises. Partly because of his class background, like he comes from a very well off family, and partly just because the culture has changed. And so I think it's rubbing in people's faces. You know, a lot of people are getting very like triggered by him, just the aesthetic, I think.
mhm,
But I'm talking for a while. I just do want to say what scares me is when he talks about city owned grocery stores and controlling the means of production. Because, you know, like, look, if he was like neoliberal in terms of economics or if he was a YIMBY or something like that, I don't fucking care. He could like be eating Ethiopian food like out of a slop bucket in public.
right,
I would be okay with that. What's freaking me out is that I do think that, you know, he's a Africana studies graduate.
yes,
He doesn't seem to have any connection with. with production, with productivity, with like real economics. That's not just like some sort of like gentry class. Either creative, like on his mom's side, and his dad is, he's a post-colonial studies professor. That's kind of like a sinecure to like just be annoying, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's what freaks me out.
Uh, I'm not quite sure how alarmed to be quite yet. I think I mean the grocery store thing, that's dumb. But to be honest, it's not gonna I don't see it having a huge impact on New Yorkers' lives, even if it ends up happening. I mean, grocery stores have very thin margins, and he wants to unionize all the like workers at these national at the like city owned grocery stores or whatever, government owned grocery stores. So a they're not going to be hugely competitive unless they pour a lot of money into it, and they're probably also not going to be cheaper, so I don't know. I mean that doesn't seem like a huge problem. The bigger problems that I see for him from him are, one, I mean, he does want to expand rent control, uh, which could be hugely destructive, especially for New York City. Uh, I I assume he's very pro criminal. He's so he so that's like an issue of crime. I know he's like doesn't want to uh, cooperate or whatever with ICE or immigration enforcement. Okay, that's an issue. And then I think there could be uh, just a general vibes based issue of, well, do people want to invest in New York City? I mean, New York City is kind of famously, it's like the capital of the world. It's like the financial center of the United States or whatever. So it could be bad for the U.S. if people, even if the actual policy impact of this guy being mayor is not huge, if people were to try and relocate because of that, that could have a big effect on New York City. Not necessarily. I mean, that could be actually good for a place like Texas or Florida, or even. I mean, Chicago has its own kind of crazy left wing mayor, but other places if people were to try and relocate. Uh, so we'll see. I mean, ultimately, I'm not I'm not totally convinced that he's actually gonna win. I mean, he is probably the favorite because he has the Democrat nomination, but I guess right now Eric Adams is running as an independent, the current mayor. Cuomo has said he's going to run as independent. Um, Either of them, I think, probably could beat. I mean, I think they would beat him in a one-on-one matchup, because Cuomo did come very. I mean, Cuomo lost, but he came pretty close in the primary, and the general electorate is less left wing. So it's it's really a matter of, are they going to split the anti Zohran vote um, between them? But if they don't, I think it's not clear to me that he will win. And if he does win, I mean that's probably bad for New York City, at least in the short term. Uh, but it could. I mean, and I know I hesitate even to say this because, as you know, I am not a lose now to win later type of guy. But I could see him provoking a big backlash and a return to a kind of Giuliani type figure if things get bad, with like with some of the stuff that he's doing. So
So one thing I'll say is like there's a couple things. One thing is like in terms of the city itself, like yeah, I mean there's only so much he can do. I do think it's been interesting some of the abundance liberals have been wish casting. We'll see.
right,
Like oh maybe he's an abundance guy, but I don't think, for example, I just don't think that he will stand up to the Democratic interest groups that cause problems in places like Chicago. I don't think he's as retarded as Brandon Johnson. That's pretty hard. But
right,
I
right.
mean, like Brandon Johnson. The reason I say Brandon Johnson is retarded, by the way, is like in Chicago, like he has really low ratings. He's basically a tool of the teachers unions, and like he has basically taken on like I think debt for the city that's like payday loan style
And
interest rate.
payday loan rates, yes.
Yeah. So I said that's what I'm saying retarded.
Yeah.
I mean that's just retarded. Okay, you don't do that. But all he cares about is the teachers unions because that's all he cares about. Okay, I don't think Zohan would do that, but I don't think he would stand up. For the police, for example, I don't think he would stand up to the teachers unions, et cetera, et cetera. I think the city would go. It would be like De Blasio on steroids, because some of the institutional, Bloomberg era bulwarks against full De Blasioization, have been eroded away since then. Adams, like I don't think he's been that bad, but the reality is it's not been a revival. There's been a lot of problems. The distraction of him being bought and paid for by the Turkish government or whatever, which is just kind of hilarious. But
Allegedly, all
allegedly,
charges
yeah,
were dismissed.
all the charges were. But all right, so okay, so that's one thing. I do think that some people are saying like, oh, he could be like a Chesa Boudin, of. I mean, I say Chesa Boudin like the district attorney, not was it London Breed? Because London Breed was just like a creature of the machine in SF. She wasn't really that ideological, but Chesa Boudin is like a better representative, like radical leftist, right? If he does that in New York, it's good for Austin. It's good for where we live. People are going to come here. It's good for Florida.
Right.
People are going to flee. And then there will be a backlash, and we will get a Giuliani slash Bloomberg like figure, because I don't think we can let New York just drop dead, you know?
Yeah, right, right.
Because basically, that
I
might happen.
mean, this is I think understated nature of American politics is there does tend to be a lot of mean reversion. The pendulum swings one way and then it swings back the other way. Um, I mean, and very often at the time, people will say, "Oh no, like it's over. It's just going to keep swinging this way, and there's no way for it to ever come." I mean, people were saying that 3 years ago about wokeness or whatever. Uh, And now I'm sure there are people who are saying that about, MAGA or whatnot. So like things swing back and forth and, backlash provokes the counter backlash and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's. I'm starting to hear people. I feel like it is. People are just getting fatigued. I mean, I don't want to like talk about this in too much detail. It's just like because like honestly, the media is like highlighting some of this stuff, but because the thing with I think like Trump's the immigration policy in the United States, the issue is like I think Trump and the administration are trying to send a message to potential illegal immigrants that like don't come here. It's not going to be easy for you. But the problem is, there's like some really bad optics here. In terms of the way the ICE, what's being videotaped. The reality is like stuff is happening all over this country, and the vast majority of it you are not seeing because it's not interesting,
sure.
you know? But there's going to be some of these incidents that are like, blown out of proportion as representative when they're not. And that's going to like scare like, grilling Americans, just like, because like grilling Americans don't want the open borders. They don't want the borders
Yeah.
like chaos, but like they're not Stephen Miller, to be candid,
They're not, although they're closer to Stephen Miller than they are to like the New York
Brian Kaplan.
CNN
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, I, you know,
Yeah.
so I
Well, I
think,
think I think they're closer to Stephen Miller in terms of their policies, policy prescriptions or policy beliefs, but they're further from Stephen Miller when it comes to their neighborhood. You know,
well,
so it's
okay,
like
yeah,
again,
if they want
yeah. There's
a partner or something,
it's
yeah.
well, not our illegals. There's that issue is like so. There's always like that tension that crops up. But so I think that is yes, you're right. I think we are getting like some thermostatic response, and we are kind of at a high tide really quickly actually,
Yeah,
because we're not even like we're just like 6 months in ish, 6 months in,
right.
and it feels like forever. But I think partly it was the late Biden period, like nothing really happened. It was kind of like in stasis. But going back to Zohran, the other thing is like aside from New York, I am kind of worried that this is a Trump sort of moment for the Democratic Party where its ideological coherency is going to collapse and it's going to swerve far to the left. Now,
Hmm.
that's good for the Republicans, but it's bad for the country, right? Because I mean, you know, at some point, someone who's a socialist will get elected in a big state, or what if a socialist gets elected in California? That is actually not good for the United States because California has tech and it has the media. it has two big industries that drive a lot of our exports. In terms of like how we get currency and stuff like that. So I'm not excited about a Democratic Party because it used to be the Democratic Party. You have to kind of say, I'm not a socialist. I'm a capitalist. I just believe in like redistribution or
Right.
whatever. Even like Elizabeth Warren said that she believed in the market principle.
You know.
Bernie's more a social democrat than a democratic socialist, which is like, okay, this is like a nerdy thing, but it's like social democrats are basically like, okay, we'll just like give people like health insurance, and as Dasha Neckersilva would say, honey, I just want like people to have health care. Whereas uh democratic socialists believe in controlling the means of production, which literally Zohran has asserted he wants to do at the end, like
Yes.
in interviews. And so that means like, they want to turn over a lot of the operation of the economy to democratic principles as opposed to the market or like individual firms or capital. And that is pretty radical and not great. And we have seen it happen um, in places like socialist like experiments in Africa, aside from the ones you know about, including Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana, where like Zohan's named after him. So this has been tried many times and it hasn't worked. And so I'm a little worried about that we are going to lose a bull. 'Cause having a left wing party, a liberal party that's at least ostensibly pro capitalist, is not a minor thing.
Yeah. For myself, I think it's very likely that the Democrat Party is going to move significantly left in the next, like 5, 10 years, because for a couple of reasons. One, I do think um, you will have some degree of backlash to Trump, maybe in the midterms, other than that, which will be kind of interpreted as Democrats don't need to moderate. I think that's plausible, if they retake the House or whatever. And then, in addition, the Democrat, like the if you look at the Democrat leadership, it is overwhelmingly just like really, really old people who came from like who are more moderate, right, than the younger, more like age wise, like the younger Democrats are much more radical. And for a long time, the party leadership has you have these octogenarians who have like a death grip on the party, uh, you know, Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Dianne Feinstein, etc. And they are aging out now, and they're going to be replaced by people who are more like, I mean, the Bernie, like even Bernie, he's pretty old, so he's going to be replaced by someone by like the AOC, right? AOC is going to replace Chuck Schumer. Zohran, he's not eligible for president or whatever, but people who are more to that way of thinking are going to be in the ascendancy in the party at least for a while. Now, reality can be a very effective teacher, I would say. We'll have to see. I mean, it's one thing to say, uh, you know, that you favor nationalizing the means of production or whatever when you don't have any power. You're just sitting around and shooting the shit with your friends or in an interview or whatever. It's another thing to actually try and do it. Still, even less to succeed. So uh, we'll have to see how performative a lot of that stuff turns out to be. But at least in terms of the official positions or whatever, I kind of expect it to have like wokeness will kind of come back from the dead, maybe on steroids and identity politics, and it'll probably be transformed. It seems like right now, a lot of um, the energy has moved for a while. That there was a lot of energy was in the like LGBTQ I2S plus space, IA2A plus whatever, um, and that now and in Black Lives Matter, and that seems to have shifted to Palestine and maybe um, actually, despite the unrest earlier, the attempt to shift it to immigration seems like it's kind of been a bit of a dud. So it's mostly just Palestine and just pure anti-Trump, you know. Um, but of course, how that will remorph when Trump exits the scene, if and when he does, I don't know. But so it'll look different. It'll look different, but it'll be left wing craziness of some form. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, Matt Iglesias actually had a piece up. I think like as we're recording, like it was like the overnight, talking about how basically like mid and geriatric millennials in particular are the most liberal generation like in
Yes.
American history. And like it tends to attenuate, but especially younger Zoomers, the ones that are under 22, are considerably more conservative, culturally, in particular, kind of anti woke, especially the males. So older Zoomers are more liberal, but younger Zoomers, the ones that like were, I don't know, let's just say they were like 18, 20 during COVID, like they are right wing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was just like COVID era restriction, like they're pissed and they're not going to, they're going to do something about it someday. And so, but I bring that up because, people like Matt Iglesias, born in like 1981, you know,
Right.
um, they're in their mid 40s now. Um, Soon, this like super liberal generation is going to come into power, and so it's just naturally, no matter what the electorate is, to some
Right.
extent, staff and like the pipeline is going to mean that you're going to have people where AOC turns out to be at the center of the party, like ideologically. I think, um, I don't think that's going to be good for the Democrats because I don't think that that's really reflective of the nation as a whole.
Yes. Right.
It's been a problem for liberals in the past when they kind of like get out of sync, like in the 1970s and 80s, when they did. Their legislative majorities were held by Southern conservatives at the time, so it's a little misleading.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, so I think that is going to be a problem, and so I think Zohran, he's interesting, but it's more like he's more of a signal of what might come rather than like obviously a new Obama because he can't be president. I also think he positions himself too far to the
Yeah.
left to be a national figure,
Yeah. He would.
and his aesthetics and optics are just like not great nationally, even though they're great in Bushwick. So he's the Bushwick candidate, which Obama, he married a woman from the South Side of Chicago, like
Right.
he combined, what he did, what Zohan might have done in New York is he mobilized Asians, including East Asians somehow, and I don't know how that is, but just looking at the things, it wasn't just South Asians. He got like a combination of Asians plus educated whites. So
Right.
in a way, he did the Obama trick where he appealed to his ethnic base
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and the wine track.
The white.
But his ethnic base is very very small nationally compared to blacks, and in the Democratic Party in particular. So I don't think even if he wanted to, which I don't think, he's not going to replicate that. But I think he does presage something. So hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find the ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of the